1, 2. Okay.
Can you hear me? Good. So, welcome to TBT. Haret Zoraim Tovim. Good afternoon, everyone. We see all our friends already joining us in Zoom. It's nice to see all of you. And of course, we want to welcome all those here in person. So we are going to play slightly differently. I'm not going to introduce Rabbi Young. I will invite Dr. Hannah Newberg to introduce him. An interesting thing, because we are going to discuss abortion, you will talk about that, so I won't introduce the topic, but I will say that it's such a central topic to our lives. Life, birth, the ability to make decisions about our own lives. It's such a central topic for our existence that when we started to discuss the fact that we were going to have a conversation, several congregants came to me and said, you know that I am related to this topic this way, or that I have this experience. It turns out that it's a very central topic, and it's important to have conversations about central topics of our lives and to give them space in the shul. So I want to say that we have, on top of Rabbi David, we have Dr. Newberg, Hanan, who will be here to share medical insights or questions or to address things that might arise from that perspective. And also Melissa Fisher, who is Goldman. Fisher, well, your Facebook is so confusing, Melissa. Your Facebook still says Goldfish? It does. Well, Goldman and Fisher. Melissa, who is a licensed therapist, and her topic of focus is loss and grief. And she might say a little bit more about her practice later on. But the idea is to have Rabbi David, who will be sharing his wisdom, his experience, his expertise, and then to have a conversation and to invite everyone to participate. So, Anna, you want to?
Hello. So I'm Hannah Newberg. I'm a practicing OBGYN at St. Joseph Hospital in Orange. And I'm here to introduce Rabbi David Young, who's the rabbi at B'nai Tzedek in Fountain Valley. He's also worked at various congregations from Florida to Alaska. I read in your bio, very impressive. And done some works at the various Jewish camps, which I also have some experience at, although we talked, didn't overlap at all. Anyway. And yeah, I'm here if anyone has any of the more medical technical questions, happy to share some experiences if that comes up. So, Rabbi Young. Oh.
Hello, is this working? Whoop. No. Now is it working? Yeah. Great. So you have a sheet for text study, which is good. I'm not going to tell you whether to read it or not because you're going to do you anyway. Please do feel free to interrupt, ask questions. I feel my teaching style is to welcome questions. Zoom as well. If you want to text a question or type a question in the chat function, and someone's reading it, by all means. Like Rabbi Nico said, this is a topic that touches us all, and it's disappointing to me to be here by myself because really my wife should be with us. She's a cantor, so she's doing a bar mitzvah this morning. So schedule-wise, it didn't work for her, but this is not my story, it's our story. And whenever a clergy person becomes, I'll use Nico's word expert, I would not use that on my own. On a topic such as abortion, there's a story behind it. So I want to start by telling you our story. In 2006, my wife and I were in school at HUC in New York, Hebrew Union College, and she is a cantor, as I said. So we were finishing up school. This was our last year. We had done all these interviews all over the country, where you shine yourself up looking nice, and in addition to looking nice, my wife was this pregnant. And a little bit before we graduated, but after we were finished with our interviews, but before we knew which jobs we were getting, we went to a sonogram. Typical run-of-the-mill, end-of-pregnancy sonogram. This was about 36 weeks. We were just expecting, okay, great, he's doing fine, see you next time. The technician is running the thing over her belly. I don't know what it's called, doctor, I'm sorry. This is probably the worst part of the bedside manner that we had. The technician goes, uh-oh. Yeah, word of advice to technicians, don't say uh-oh. So he goes out, brings in a doctor, explains to us that our baby had lyssencephaly and microcephaly, which means, going in reverse order, his head was not growing at the proper rate, his head was too small, and the brain, you know how the brain is bumpy? His was smooth. And the brain needs those bumps. So he was not going to live outside the womb. It was a biological impossibility according to the doctors, and according to the laws of the state of New York, we would have had to have the baby. She would have had to give birth to Elijah, and we would have had to put him on life support, And we would have had to have ended the life support, what people call pulling the plug. So that was a psychological process that we were not prepared for. And we did some research. We spoke to advisors, doctors, friends. You can hear okay? And we decided to go to Kansas because at the time, Kansas was the only state that allowed third-term abortions. And the best read-only doctor who was doing late-term abortions after 36 weeks was Dr. George Tiller of blessed memory. If you recognize the name, he was in the news about 13 years ago was when he was murdered, standing in front of his church, handing out programs for the morning. So just like we have people greeting us when we walk in the door of our sanctuaries, that's what he was doing. He was trying to welcome people in to have it for their day of prayer, and he was shot in the stomach and died. He was murdered, and so he was the doctor who helped us out. And the process is such that you go, please, thank you. You go to his clinic in Kansas, and it's a 5-day process, usually. Day 1, it was just us and 2 other couples. All 3 couples that week had issues with the developing baby's nervous system. I don't know any details besides microcephaly and lissencephaly. Those are the 2 sciencey words that I know in my whole life. And if you are a kind of person like me who does not know science very well, who's not very good at telling science, you don't want to know sciencey words because that usually indicates a problem. So, sorry if I'm being flip about science, doctors. So that morning, where we went into the clinic that first day, and we met these other 2 couples, I know for a fact that all 6 people in that room wanted to be parents. We all wanted to have, in our case, a second baby, in their case, a first baby. We were all thrilled and excited until we heard bad news. And one of the big problems that I have with discussing abortion is that it becomes political. And the 2 sides of the argument are pro-life and pro-choice. And if you've ever watched a TV show that was on Showtime for a little while by Penn and Teller, and the name is not a name that I can say in the sanctuary, but in Hebrew it's shtuyot, and the initials are BS. So that's what the show was called. And they do every episode they debunk something that we all believe in, and so in their pro-life, pro-choice episode, they said that the names for both sides are stupid because everyone is pro-life, everyone likes life, and everyone is pro-choice. Everyone likes having choices. So both names are terrible. Better this way? Better this way? Okay. Maybe online? Yeah. So, and my sunglasses. You take this one? So this is especially true for those of us who were there that day. We all were pro-life. We all wanted to have a baby. We all were so thankful to have the choice to be there. So thankful that it was legal, that it was medically possible, that Dr. Tiller was available to help us through this difficult time. Here's the other problem with language. No one is pro-abortion. Not one person in the world is pro-abortion. nobody wants to have an abortion. And we are pro medicine. We are thankful for the processes and the doctors that allow us to have the medical procedures we need. But no one wakes up in the morning and says, I really want an abortion today. So the seriousness of the topic is something that is important for us to use language that is respectful to each other. I don't know what anyone's opinion in this room is except for me, and I can only speak for myself, and I can only speak to the texts that I've studied as far as how I view them. But I hope that we can understand that starting from a place of respect and honesty and openness is always, for me, the best choice. So it's because of this experience that the week that we were in Kansas, Natalie slept a lot. And so when we go to the hotel room, I had two choices. I could sleep or read. So I did a lot of reading. And as you could imagine, the topic that I decided to read was usually Jewish laws on abortion. So what I've put together for you, this is, I did not, I've never written anything comprehensive over it. I'm just kind of familiar with where to find the texts. So what I've put together for you starts at the beginning. It starts with where the laws about how to treat a fetus come from. And it starts in Exodus. Will someone read the Exodus text, please?
When men fight and one of them pushes a pregnant woman and a miscarriage results, but no other damage ensues, the one responsible shall be fined according to the woman's husband, as the woman's husband may exact from him. The payment to be based on reckoning. But if other damage ensues, the penalty shall be life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, bruise for bruise.
Thank you. So it has a feeling of the general, like, eye for an eye law, the lex talionis, but it's really not the general lex talionis. It's specifically about this pregnant woman, and this is the only law about a pregnant woman that's not about purity and having the baby and how when you're impure and when you're okay again. So this is what are your thoughts on this text? Like, where does it take your minds? Did Nico not warn you this was going to be a participation class? Payment, yeah. So payment, compensation for loss of the child, if that damage, if I agree with you today in 2021. She's, with the woman I agree with you that the damages that the woman incurs is an important thing to think of. I don't think the Bible did. But it treats the woman like property of the husband, as does the rest of the Bible and the Talmud, and yes, and that's something that I say in my classes often, that it's good to acknowledge that. It's better to acknowledge we've gotten past that, and we have to understand the mindset of the people writing the stuff before we can get better than they were. I didn't say we're there. Hopefully we're on the way, state to state. Yeah. So it is the point of view of what's the fetus is what this text is asking. And the fetus is in part property of the man who put it in there. And in part an acknowledgement that there could be pain, that there's loss, but it's monetary. Even that eye for eye, tooth for tooth, it's really about her eye, her tooth, her hand, etc. And Rashi comments on this and says, you're not going to literally poke someone's eye out because they accidentally poke someone's eye out. What you're going to do is pay compensation for the eye. So the value for the eye is, what that person has to go through, and because she was property, it might not be valued as much as someone who loses their eye and they're a scribe. That's a higher value. She's not going to be a scribe in this case. So it's property value. It's loss. But when we go into every other law that has to do with abortion in Jewish thought is based on this text. They get all of their understanding of abortion from the idea that a pregnant woman, yes, she has a life inside her. But as to when does life start, that grand question, they come at it a lot differently than things that we might see in other places. So, for example, Yevamot 69b, we see. I'll go ahead and read so we don't have to pass the microphone around. Rav Chizda said, if she is pregnant, until 40 days from conception, the fetus is merely water. And just for the sake of understanding the layout, if a text is just one font and not bolded, it's a translation. It's a direct translation. If there's bold and not bold, the bold is the translation, and the not bold is the words that help you understand because of the terseness of the Talmud. So 40 days from conception, the fetus is merely water. Now, quick math. 40 days is about how much time, coincidentally? 6 weeks was the number I was looking for. Yeah, hello, Texas. This merely water. Rav Chizda, like me, not a scientist. But that I do what I think what he means is cells. That there, yes, fluid, but it doesn't have form at this point. Now, they say 40 days from conception. We count, please correct me if I'm wrong, from the last period. So, this could be a little later than 40 days the way we conceive it today. No pun intended. So this kind of struck me this time through of collecting texts. This particular text struck me because it's so close to 6 weeks. And even if it's merely water, like a lot of people don't know they're pregnant at 40 days. You can, as I understand it, you can be pregnant and have your period on track, and you would never know that an egg and sperm had connected, and I think in those cases, if you are trying to get pregnant, there's disappointment, but no feeling like you've lost a life inside you. Now, this is again, like, it would be so much better if my wife was here talking about this, because when it comes to what it feels like to be pregnant, I'm not teaching you any Torah you don't know to say she knows better than I do. But we've talked about it, so hopefully that'll do for today. And the next text, what is the reasoning of Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi for this ruling? and this ruling is about the idea that when men fight and a pregnant woman is injured and she can and the miscarriage results. So he's commenting on that. He makes a ruling that's more about her purity than it is about abortion itself. So we're not going to worry about that right now. But he holds a fetus is considered as its mother's thigh. In other words, a part of her body. I love and I hate this metaphor. The fetus is as its mother's thigh it's a limb to them legally. Legally speaking, the fetus is another limb. So on the one hand, it doesn't quite give the feeling of what a fetus is to just say it's another limb. On the other hand, you wouldn't want to lose your foot. And everyone who has feet can understand conceptually what it might be like to lose a foot. So this group of men who wrote the Talmud, it's probably the closest they could get to understanding. But that it's like a limb, I think when you take this law on its own and you think about if a person did need surgery on their foot and they had to make a decision to amputate, that person's decision would be binding. That person's decision would never be challenged legally. If you need to amputate your foot, you do what it takes to save the person's life whose foot needs to be amputated. And that understanding holds into the Jewish concept of saving the mother's life. Understanding that the life of the person who is pregnant takes precedence over anything else. Because we are a people who values life. And you'll hear all kinds of other explanations, a lot of which, frankly, make me uncomfortable. But this is the basis. I think part of what makes me uncomfortable is that it's always, again, a bunch of men describing abortion law. And I keep repeating that because it probably in a sense of feeling underqualified, but also to apologize for my teachers of our Talmudic rabbis. Any questions up to this point as to how the rabbis view the status of a fetus? Okay. Next Mishnah, this is a little difficult to read, so which is why I wrote trigger warning. If you are a little queasy, and if you can mute it in your queasy, lucky you. Otherwise, no one seems to be running away, so good luck. From Mishnah Ohalot, if a woman is having trouble giving birth, they cut up the child in her womb and bring it forth limb by limb, because her life comes before the life of the child. But if the greater part has come out, one may not touch it, for one may not set aside one person's life for that of another. Here's their line. This is where they're starting to try and define their line. I mentioned before that we have different views as to when life starts. As far as I'm aware, I'm not an expert on Christian law either, but as far as I'm aware, Christianity teaches in general that life starts at conception. In Judaism, we teach life starts when the child graduates grad school. Making sure you're still with me. But they're setting lines. And this is the line that they're setting at the beginning. It's not a clear line. It's the majority of it has come out. And the words the child, those are added in. They don't refer to it as the child, they refer to it as it.
Distinction between acknowledging the fetus as an object and once it's fully born as a subject, right? The way you address an object in Hebrew, I go a little bit for those that had the opportunity to study Martin Buber with me. So the idea of addressing an object as an et, a thing. Et in Hebrew is aleph taf. This is how you address an object. And then an ata, in the male use of the word you, in which you acknowledge that there is a subject, and what makes a subject is the soul. So in this context, it's interesting to think about when the tradition acknowledges the beginning of the soul and the unity between the soul and body. I guess you might go there, otherwise happy to pinpoint on that.
Which is what it says at the end here. Ein dochin nefesh mipnei nefesh. There's no setting aside one soul for another if we're going to translate literally. But nefesh is what we say is soul. They meant life. So soul in our context is, a kind of an ineffable, indescribable essence that's within us. For them, it just meant a living presence. It meant that something had the ability to live. So at some point, before the fetus is out, it can be brought out in pieces. And at another point, it's considered a nefesh. It's considered a life. And so it cannot be, it must be cared for as soon as it is able to be considered a life. So where's that line? Hello.
When my daughter was pregnant and having her baby, she was having a lot of trouble with the delivery. So they did a cesarean. The baby was born fine, and the baby excuse me. The baby is now a doctor and doing great.
Mazal tov. That's fantastic. I'm glad that was the ending. Mazal tov. Fantastic. We also had our first child before the son that we had to have an abortion for. His name would have been Elijah. So I sometimes will describe him and sometimes I'll say his name. But before Elijah was born, our son Gabriel was already around. So he was about a year and a half, and he was an emergency C-section, and he's not a doctor. He's a senior in high school, but he's very good looking. He looks like his mother, and he's 6'1". Yeah, right. And he has this big head of hair, and he's super skinny, so he looks like a giant Q-tip. But we love him. So yeah, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful things can happen thanks to modern medicine that couldn't happen then. Who knows if this child that they're describing here was causing the mother difficulty in pregnancy, that child probably today would be saved, and that mother, and but at the time when there was no sunroof, there was pretty much one way out, unless you had someone very skilled. Then they would have to perform these more barbaric procedures. So the next couple of texts are more about classification, where we're narrowing down. The next one, Mishnah Torah, that's by Maimonides. So murderer and the preservation of life is the name of his chapter. I'm sorry, I didn't write it. He says, and such, when complications arise and a pregnant woman cannot give birth, it is permitted to abort the fetus in her womb, whether with a knife or with drugs. This fascinates me, that they had drugs to do it somehow. I don't know what the drugs were. I don't know how they acquired them, but Maimonides is turn of the 12th century. So it's not, what, sorry? Whiskey. Wow. No, I'm just going in my mind as to how that might help or not, but yeah, okay. We're going to skip that. Did someone say shrooms? No, okay. Now I'm hearing things. So whatever this drug was, there was something that Maimonides is aware of that someone could drink probably, and it would cause an abortion or with a knife, so some sort of surgical procedure. So this is just the idea that Maimonides is putting out there point blank. If there are complications and a pregnant woman cannot give birth, abortion is permitted. It doesn't say how many weeks. It doesn't say with what permissions or under what conditions, except for she can't give birth. The implication is her life is at risk. And then he classifies the fetus. For the fetus is considered a rodef, a dangerous pursuer of its mother. A rodef is another Torah classification. A rodef is someone who is pursuing someone else to kill them. And if you are pursued by a rodef, you may kill them. You may kill the rodef in defense. If you see someone being pursued by a rodef, you may kill the rodef. So the classification of being a rodef means you are out to do harm to a human being. The one that always pops into my mind as a famous example is the man who shot Rabin. They don't use his name. We know his name. But if you go to Rabin Square, they have these metal plates, metal discs on the ground, and it says where Rabin was standing and where each of the Shin Bet or whoever was watching him, was on guard, was standing, and it shows where the shooter was. Where the shooter was, it doesn't say his name. It says Rodef. It's a way to say he is not a whole person. He is classified by this one action. So having that mindset, that's how they classify a fetus doing harm to its mother. As someone who is intending to harm her. Now, classifying it that strongly seems harsh, but it also allows these litigious rabbis to have that, they understand that classification of rodef. And so they can then kind of justify or explain away their feelings over terminating a pregnancy. It's not easy. Hello.
What about, you said there's a danger to the mother. Now, everything I'm reading is about, you're saying about a danger to the mother, and what I'm seeing is a physical danger. Where does it come in that, maybe a danger mentally?
I was waiting for that question. Thank you so much. It doesn't say physical. It feels like it says physical, but it doesn't actually say physical danger. And a commentary by a rabbi in the 1800s, and I've forgotten his name, I apologize, says point blank, this is not just physical harm. This is if the baby would cause her too much psychological pain to bear. I believe that when that commentary was written, he was thinking about rape and incest. But there are other ways where it could be too painful for someone to bear having a child. I don't like to think about the what ifs. I always tell this to my students. My confirmation class, when I tell them a Jewish law, they love to say, well, what if this? And what if this? And what if this? I said, folks, we can what if this to death. We'll find an exception. I promise we'll find an exception if you keep what ifing. But in this case, it's a lot of them. And we can I think agree that there are psychological pains that would make it too hard. And that's what happened to us. The psychological pain of having to give birth to Elijah, watch him on the machine, and have to, again, colloquially speaking, pull the plug, that was something we could not bear. And we decided to terminate because we felt the pain of losing him in Kansas would be a little bit less than the pain of watching him be born, watching him move, and still even attached to machines, and then have to terminate his life at that point. Too much for us to bear. So we are the example. So it's not just a what if that you're asking; it's a what is. And again, with counsel from colleagues about Jewish law and what was permitted, we all came to the opinion that absolutely psychological pain is included in this. Thank you for asking.
And I wanted to know, you said that life, the soul was life. And I wanted to know whether or not it was the ability to produce life itself, when it became viable, because a seed has the ability to grow into a tree. It may not, but it has the ability to do so. And so, at what point do you consider the soul being available, if you will? Is it prior to what we consider a growing entity, or is it the ability to grow into an entity?
So I'm going to condense your question. Where's the line? Is that basically, where's the line? So let's read the next one, because this one I think is where we're going. Rav Chizda raised an objection to Rav Huna. This is what they did. They raised objections to one another. They're always arguing. This is how the Talmud is one big book of arguing. I think so. I'll check. So Rav Chizda raised an objection to Rav Huna. Once his head has emerged during the birthing process, he may not be harmed in order to save the mother, because one life may not be pushed aside to save another. This phrase, "one life may not be pushed aside to save another life," is what we read up above. On the top of the same page, but the last couple of lines, "For one may not set aside one person's life for that of another." So the same phrase from Ohalot, is here again in Sanhedrin, as far as you can't replace, nefesh mipnei nefesh. The English is a tiny bit different, but the Hebrew is exactly the same. She'ein dochin nefesh mipnei nefesh. So we know that you can't set aside one life for another. Once there are two lives, you have to do your best for both. So what's the line? Right here. Once his head has emerged. Once the head is out. So the line is here. That's the point where Jewish law considers the move from fetus to baby. And as you were asking your question, life, the ability to create more life and all of that, your definition, my definition, Sanhedrin's definition what does it mean to be a life, to be a nefesh, to have a soul, to, you know, I don't know. I think that's the best answer. Or perhaps better, whatever answer you give, you're right. That is such a personal definition, and it means something different to all of us. And you can answer with colloquialisms too. You know, you can, if you can love, you're alive. If there's a difference between existing and living, and there are all kinds of aphorisms that really only hold to whatever circumstance they're written for. They're not really about this. So the rabbis put a clear line, the head, once the head is out. Because once the head is out, it could breathe. And that brings us back to Genesis, where what creates a nefesh? God forms, this is not the first time God creates humans, this is the second time. God forms Adam, forms a human out of earth and breathes into its nostrils, and that's giving it life. So breath equals life in that moment in Genesis.
Very passionate about that. And the proximity between the word neshama, soul, and neshima. We speak about that often. They're almost the same.
And neshama is the word for soul that really means soul. Nefesh is the word for soul that means life, and it's with neshama that you become nefesh.
Can I give you one more thing? So just one more interesting thing, because Rabbi Young brought this construction of Adam, is that until that moment, and this is an important, that life were a golem-like structure. We're just dust. No, and the same book of Genesis says that we come from dust and we return to dust. And when we sing the blessing for our souls, we say, Kol hazman sheneshama v'kirvi modeh ani lefanecha, or modah ani lefanecha, which basically means, for as long as I have my soul within me, which is that's the event of life, I will be grateful to you. But we start being alive, according to this idea, at the moment that we have a soul within ourselves. And we stop being alive when that soul is not with us anymore. Before that, we are just a golem.
Now we have everlasting life. If we, so this is the end of the legalese portion of the teaching. So if anyone had any other questions about the law, Jewish law on abortion, this is your moment. Your moment won't be forever ended, but okay. I saw you first in the back.
When life is and abortions, so how do they? Is this more like for the reform movement, let's say the liberal but progressive movement, as opposed to the more traditional or?
Yeah, so I think in every class I teach Jewish law, and someone asks, well, what are the Orthodox? Do the Orthodox think this? Do the conservative think this? I don't know what anyone else thinks. But I know that this comes from the Talmud, and so the from the Talmud. Sorry, so the ones who have a looser interpretation of the Talmud are usually us, but the Talmud says when the head is out, that's when life begins. So I can't tell you what whoever they are, I can't tell you what any they thinks, but we can, we'll have Rabbi Nico lead a class on the differences among the movements of Judaism, because it's more about where they understand the authority of the law, as opposed to each particular law what they think of it. Sorry, it's kind of a non-answer. I apologize. Very Jewish.
I'm just wondering what the most modern ethical discussion is based on obviously, we now know that it's not just water in the womb. We know there's something forming there based on, we can see things they couldn't see in Talmudic times. So I'm just wondering what the current ethical discussion is. I know when I was pregnant, and then they gave me a test to see if there was, Down syndrome or something. And I thought to myself, well, what would I do? It's still obviously a viable life, but it's not something that I necessarily would want to have to deal with. And so those tests are now available, and I just don't know what the current Jewish ethical thought is, having so much more knowledge now to deal with those types of issues.
It's a very personal decision when it comes to those kind of things. The Reform response on this is very much like my own teaching, that it's up to the number one, the person who's pregnant. Number one. Number two, a very close to maybe, the person who partnered to make that pregnancy, if there is such a person. So that if someone can purchase sperm, so there's no other person, but so those people, their decision. Then when it comes to like where does life start, and the philosophical discussion and what is danger? Is it only physical? And yeah, so when it and the Reform responsa on this brings up Tay-Sachs specifically, and says, if there's an amnio and it's discovered that the baby has Tay-Sachs, I don't know if an amnio is the only way. So then the parents make that decision because it would be too painful to watch their child go through such a horrible disease. That's their decision. And there's no judgment on the couple over this thing. Yeah, now we're getting it. Now you're getting it. Have you seen Gattaca? Gattaca? Yeah. So I teach a class called Real Judaism, REEL Judaism. So a lot of times I go to movies when I think about examples for applying Jewish law. Gattaca is a movie with Ethan Hawke and Uma Thurman, and he was born as the older brother who was born, just regular, and then his older brother was he had his genes selected so that he could be a more perfect human, the most perfect human that his parents could possibly produce. And so what are the ethics, the idea of, what are the ethics of creating the best baby you can? And what does that mean? Blue eyes? Well, of course, blue eyes, because blue eyes is, the best, right? But Rabbi Nico and I both have blue eyes. That's why I said that. I held my breath. When do we, do we choose eye color? Do we choose hair color? Do we choose skin color? Like or do we choose healthy, or do we choose left-handed? Because again, that's the best. But where does it, where's the line? And I think to a certain extent, thank God we don't really have to think about that right now. What we really have to think of the lines are for self-driving cars. And I'm all for self-driving cars, but the ethics, like that's the ethics of now. like how do we program those to like, pedestrian over driver and passenger, etc. So, okay.
This might be on the plan to talk about, but I'm curious with, Judaism does, psychologically speaking, grief and death and dying rituals and mitzvot so well. But here you have a dilemma, right? Because if the head doesn't come out and it's not a life, do we get to do those same rituals? Do you say Kaddish? Do you have Shiva? Do you get to have a burial ceremony? And I'm curious what the Jewish take is on that.
Yeah. You are right. It's on the syllabus. So hold that thought, and it's the next text.
I just had a quick comment. You said you weren't sure what the Christian ritual was, and there's two things, and I've studied this because I study law, so forgive me, but the 40 days that's addressed here, St. Thomas Aquinas, around the same time as Maimonides, said that 40 days for a male would be ensoulment, which meant that anything happened after 40 days, there was a soul present, but it was 80 to 90 days if it was a female, but of course you wouldn't have known until something happened. But those 40 days is translated, I think the Catholic understanding came from the Jewish understanding. And the second thing is...
Same source text.
Yeah, it's right. So, I mean, like you see that in Catholicism, but it didn't translate into the church, like in the papal law until the 19th century. They didn't even pick up on it at all. That with regards to abortion, there was that never hit abortion views. And in fact, in the United States, it didn't even come into conversation because it was Catholicism, not Christianity, which is where most of that debate is. And the other thing is, in American law, there are scienter requirements for abortion, for later term abortions, what would be considered legal, like certain places where if this part of it is birthed, it would be this kind of procedure, or if that thing is, and it's very much related to when the head up here, that same passage. And so American law seems to be, in some respects, in some of the states, very similar to what we're seeing in these texts.
Thank you so much. And for now. So I really appreciate that history and context. Thank you so much for that. And to think that it's 1900s kind of blows me away. Other questions on the legalities? Okay, so Judaism is a religion based on laws, but one of the things that I love about it so much is that it deals with feeling too. And in those 5 days when I was spending a lot of time studying, it's this next text that just spun around in my head again and again and again. Anyone, including a child who is 1 day old, who dies, their status in relation to their father and mother and to all relatives, in terms of the halachot of mourning, is like that of a full-fledged groom. Chatan shalem. This kills me every time. There are lots of words that the rabbis could have used to say adult or child. They could have used tinok, baby. They could have used yeled, child. They could have used gever, person, adam, ish. They chose chatan, bridegroom. And that particular choice is the part that's so painful to anyone who's gone through it. Because, as I said in the beginning, everyone in that waiting room, we all wanted to have a baby. We all were excited for the life. And we weren't excited because we had a creature with a heartbeat in our house. We weren't excited because it could breathe. We didn't even imagine that every time we walked in the door, it was going to greet us with joy. That's why we have a dog. But we were excited for all of those stages of life. We were excited to, as a father, as a a partner of someone who's pregnant, you're excited to throw ball with them, even though there's a long time before that happened, or in the case of my children, never. But we don't do sports ball in the Young house. But we have these imaginings, and usually what the father, at least especially in our case, what the father imagines in a stereotypical pregnancy, is about playing with an older child, and what the mother imagines is kind of everything. But it's that everything. It's the first day of school. It's putting those stupid pictures on Facebook. It's the bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah. It's confirmation. It's losing teeth and skinning knees and getting bad grades and getting really good grades and graduating high school and becoming a chatan, getting married. You're not just losing heartbeat. You're losing all of those moments. You're losing all of those celebrations. That's why they use chatan shalem. Because they're acknowledging that it's a terrible decision to have to make. And even saving a life brings with it pain of what could have been. Did that help with, was there more to your question that? So
And you've made a point where you said we would have named him Elijah, right? But what I do in my office is I encourage them to name them Elijah, refer to them Elijah, because it's healing. So I'm not an expert. I went to a Jewish university, but I am not an expert. But my experience and my remembrance of the Jewish laws, this is the one time especially when it comes to death and dying, that, in my opinion, Judaism travels away from a psychological healing.
I agree.
How do we, in modern times, when for you or me or Rabbi or when or Hannah, when we're counseling these families, how do we find that complement? What is the new modern commentary?
Yeah. Thank you. So many ways to answer the question. I agree with you that we kind of get it wrong here when it comes to the rituals around it, because it's really, for a boy, you don't mourn, you don't do any of the mourning practices unless, according to the Talmud, you don't do any mourning practices unless it's after the bris. So it says this is not about the legalese as you were asking. It's about the feeling. The legalese is if the boy has had a bris, then you do all of the mourning rituals, and if the girl is a month old, you do all of the mourning rituals. I think like you disagree with this. When we lost Elijah, we were, to a certain extent, thank God we were in our last year of rabbinical school, because that meant that we were surrounded by loving friends, caring people who knew how to do Jewish. And they surrounded us. We did, there's a custom at the end of a funeral that I don't see very often in California, called Lines of Consolation, where the mourners will walk through everybody who's lined up, and they all will offer their condolences or some sort of thought or prayer. My friends, my colleagues now, my rabbis, my cantors. I'm thinking especially of Rabbi Dara Frimmer, who happens to be in LA now, and Rabbi Stephanie Colin, who's bounced back coast to coast, but now she's in, I think, Brooklyn. And the two of them really took the reins and set up this ritual for us and showed us how important it is to ritualize, even if it's not within the realms of the black and white. It was beautiful. We walked through rows of our friends in Central Park in New York, and it was springtime. It was a beautiful day. The procedure that we had was actually I didn't want to get into the science of the procedure, but the day that Elijah was no longer considered alive by any science was Passover, the first day of Passover. And if the name Elijah is not lost on you, I don't want to make myself cry any more than I'm already trying to stop. But the symbolism of that name was very poignant in the ritual that they created for us, and that ritual was so important to us for healing. So I encourage it, and I think creating ritual is beautiful, but there are also opportunities. Natalie and I were just published in the new CCAR, the Central Conference of American Rabbis just put out a supplement for their rabbi's manual, and we wrote a ritual of child loss especially after an abortion. And again, like, it's not something that anyone wants to be published on because of experience, but so not only do we agree that there should be rituals, we wrote one. And part of what we wrote actually has this next text in it. I saw your hand for a second.
I would say religiosity or spiritual or whatever. I was under the assumption, let's say I heard it, and I know it was practiced somewhat while I was growing up. And you have to understand, I came from quite a traditional European Yiddish shtetl life environment. That if the child was a stillborn, or whatever, for whatever reason, it was within the, I don't know if it's 30 days or 3 months. This is where I'm getting it wrong. That it was buried along the fence, and the mother didn't go to the cemetery. Only the father took it, because it was to keep more like to save the mother, to sort of, so she shouldn't grieve as much. And maybe that was maybe traditional more, that because so many children were born, there wasn't the medicine, so there were a lot of more, deaths at birth than there is now. So it was more like to ease the pain of the mother, and that, I remember they had to bury them along the fence and outside of the community.
I'm going to answer with another non-answer.
Okay. Go ahead.
I'm on sabbatical right now for a month, and one of the things that I get to do is go to other synagogues for Shabbat services. So so far I've been to Shir Hamalot and Bat Yam and here, and all of the words are the same, but the melodies are sometimes the same, sometimes different. But even when the melodies are the same, there are differences. And so we take the same notes on paper, the same words from the prayer book, and we combine them in slightly different ways. And it's all beautiful, and it all serves the purpose. So while I have not heard of that ritual in particular, I think it's along the lines of the same melody and the same words.
Just as another thing, just like with abortions for women who were raped during the war times, that and as a Jewish girl, you were, oh my God, I was raped and I'm pregnant. That according to the rabbis, that's why Judaism passes through the child, through the mother. That no, don't look at this child as a bastard, but it is your child, and he will take your identity as the mother. So again, to ease. I mean, I thought there were beautiful sort of ways of easing it. At the time, if you were raped during the war times, that you do carry the child forward, and also the times where, yes, if there's so much death at birth, that the child really isn't considered mourning for the first 3 months. Again, like you said, it could be just a.
Yeah, and there's strict interpretation of the law and interpretation of the law so that it can adhere to modernity, and interpretation of the law so that it can adhere to each and every individual. And the idea of child taking its identity from mother or father has actually gone through a little flip-flopping over the years, and yes, that was the most recent flip-flop. I'm a fan of the current reform version, where one bio parent plus a Jewish upbringing, and you take your identity from the biological parent that you choose, or adoptive just changes all the rules. So when you're adopted, then your parents tell you. Sorry? Oh, in the conservative movement, it's becoming a strong voice as well. Well, yeah, if you want to, it's like the chancellor of the conservative college said in the 90s. He said, if you want to know where the conservative movement is going to be in 20 years, look at the reform movement today. And there was a conservative rabbi who said that.
Can I make a comment on the previous source? I think that the idea of the groom, I think, is very powerful, and I want to offer an association that came to my mind. So first, something to what Melissa said in that context, is I think that the rabbis are dealing with a real challenge. If they acknowledge this as a life, it kills the entire argument. So they can't, in their world perspective, with the limitations that they had, they couldn't offer something else. They needed to acknowledge it as a thing and not as a death, and therefore everything else that they are saying becomes kosher. On the other hand, they do acknowledge and they do understand the emotional pain involved in this situation. I think that the rabbis get it. They don't always, but sometimes they do. And I think that what they are saying here is so powerful, because it's like that of a full-fledged groom. Now, what do we say? How do we bless parents at the moment of brit milah, of birth? שתזכו לגדלו או לגדלם לחופה וקידושים. May you have the blessing to see them growing and accompany them to their chuppah. So we say that at the moment of the brit milah, and the moment in which we say, this is life, and here it starts. And they are saying, on the other hand, the rabbis are saying there is also that. It's true too. So there are two truths that they are acknowledging. I think it's quite powerful that they are using this wording. I wasn't aware of this text. I think it's very, very powerful.
One last text from the book of Samuel, 2 Samuel chapter 12. This is just after King David was made aware that Bathsheba is having difficulty in childbirth. The baby may or may not live, and this was a baby born in sin. David sent Bathsheba's husband to the front lines to, hoping he'd be killed. So basically, David murdered her husband so that he could have her as a wife. So David is sitting in sackcloth and ashes when he finds that his child's life is in danger. So when David saw his servants talking in whispers, David understood that the child was dead. David asked his servants, "Is the child dead?" "Yes," they replied. Thereupon David rose from the ground. He bathed and anointed himself. He changed his clothes. He went into the house of Adonai and prostrated himself. Then he went home and asked for food, which they set before him, and he ate. His courtiers asked him, "Why have you acted in this manner? When the child was alive, you fasted and wept, but now that the child is dead, you rise and take food." He replied, "While the child was alive, I fasted and wept because I thought, who knows? Adonai might have pity on me and the child may live. But now that he is dead, why should I fast? Can I bring him back again? I shall go to him, but he will never come back to me." Not maybe the healthiest way to mourn, but in general, the principle of, in Judaism, we live. We move forward with our life. We, yes, ritualize. Yes, we pray fervently that people will heal. We do a Mishaberach when the Torah is out. We do a Mishaberach when we're saying the Amidah if the Torah is not going to be out. We do healing services, and we put people's names on lists, and we pray and cry and yell at God for the life and health and safety of our loved ones. But when something is final and nothing can be done to save the life, then we move forward. At a funeral, it's a mitzvah for the mourners to eat. The mourners need to eat. Usually an egg for symbolic reasons, but if you're sitting Shiva, people will bring you food, and you're supposed to eat it when people bring you food, because you never know. You know, sometimes your mourning is so deep that you might not know when the last time you ate is. And of course, you know, in today's world, when every Jewish person in your home is trying to feed you, you can accept within reason. But we acknowledge the finality of decisions made, in this case, by God, by the confines of medicine, by the confines of human biology, and we do have to eventually stop mourning and live. Hannah?
Applies in like a terminal diagnosis for a baby who's not yet born, or even there's situations where, you know, we think it's pretty inevitable that this is not going to end well. You know, the baby is maybe still technically has a heartbeat, but, you know, the situation, like everybody knows, would that like almost be allowance to do the kind thing and kind of end things versus waiting and probably, you know, going badly anyway? Like, where's the actual line?
I think that doing the kind thing is the line, that because we value the mother's life. And I mean, I don't think David had a concept of feminism. So we've come a much, I think even the Talmud comes farther than David did. But and that's not, you know, not to say they were feminists, far from it. But I think we have a responsibility to the mother first, and to acknowledge the pain that both parents feel. You know, both parents are suffering a loss, and it's felt very differently by each of them. The person who bears the pregnancy has a much different connection than the person who partners the pregnancy. And it doesn't make it not sad for the partner, but the kindness to both of them is a part of that psychological pain, and relieving the psychological pain. It's a part of the relieving potential physical harm, and so much of that is all boils down to embracing life itself. Vayechi, as we studied today.
Why wouldn't the same, maybe it's this whole nephesh thing, but why wouldn't the same apply to a person that's in their last stage terminal illness?
Yeah,
You know,
that's not the area I'm
is
an
the
expert on.
difference there? You know, maybe it's because they are now alive, but you know, it's sort of the same situation.
Yeah, that's a really, really interesting question that
But it clearly would not let you hasten that
well,
death,
well,
not from what I understand.
the yeah, there's nuance, but it's a different topic. It's a totally different topic because presumably because the person you're talking about has a say in it. So maybe not right, but it's still got too many differences to. I'm gonna not let you take the wheel on that one. Sorry.
I got a little distracted by Anne because now I have an idea for like a Jewish hospice one floating in my head. But I think I like the ambiguity in the concept of the pain of the mother, the harm to the mother, because and it goes back to the beginning of your talk and making this a partisan issue and all of that is because we can't decide what's pain. I can't tell Rabbi Nico that his headache is so bad he needs to go home right now, right? Only Rabbi Nico can do that, right? And so there are other people who were in your situation who would have wanted to experience the labor and go through that, and for them, that's how they would have grieved, right? But having that choice, the Talmud is the rabbis are leaving it up to. It doesn't say what, it doesn't describe the pain to make that decision. And I will just add the nuance because we've talked a lot about when there's the baby is not viable and things like that. And I'm trained in reproductive loss. I'm a clinician. That's one of my specialties. The American Psychological Association, National Association of Social Workers, any clinical group in America that you look at, when they define the umbrella of reproductive loss, it includes abortion of all kinds. And wanting that child or not wanting that child is not a condition of the grief, right? There's an element of grief no matter what. If you're in a bank robbery at gunpoint and nobody is ever harmed, you still grieve being a person who was never in that traumatic situation because your life is forever changed. And so the fact that it's ambiguous in deciding if this is going to cause harm to the mother or the father, it doesn't say father, but now in 2021 we're going to include the other parent of any gender, right? If there is another parent. So to me, like in that terms, the Jewish context is very in line with what humans need to heal.
Isn't here a question, and I want to open from that for you. Isn't here a question about self-determination, not only about life? Isn't this about life and self-determination and personal experience? What's that salad there?
Yeah, so self-determination and life and dealing with pain as it hits us and the ambiguity of Jewish law, I think all fits into the bubble of why we do this in the first place. Like, why are we even in this room? Is because of all of that, and it's the ambiguity of Jewish law. I think that makes Jewish law so powerful, because we don't have those firm lines in the sand. Even when the rabbis say that the head is the line, there are cases when the head's not the line. They're obscure, more obscure cases, but still there are exceptions. And the quip that Rabbi Nico and I had about arguing, that's Jewish law. It's arguing, and which means there's always an exception. And an exception is not, it's a weird phrase, it's a weird word to say exception, because we think of it as someone who gets away with something, or but we're all exceptions. An exception is an acknowledgement of the humanity of each and every situation. The idea that every human life is worth an entire world. And that's why we can spend this much time talking about each and every human life, because each and every decision that impacts a human life, and whether that human life is the mother, the father, the baby, the fetus, et cetera, or as Mishnah Nida says, to all the relatives. I spoke extensively about my wife's and my pain, and talk about our parents. Maybe that's why. They had pain too. And it's important for us to look at every exception, and to help everyone deal with their pain, which can be an insurmountable task, but such is life. That's Judaism, is to treat each and every case as worth our time.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for sharing and making yourself vulnerable. I came at this subject from a little different perspective because I lost a pregnancy. And I live every day wondering whether that was a son or a daughter, and what that person would have been if he or she would have been alive today. And I'll never forget a temple member trying to console me and saying, if you had had that child, you wouldn't have necessarily the one you have now. And so in a way, it's like what our sources say in carrying on and being able to live another day, and being consoled even when you refuse to be consoled. And so when does a soul start to exist? I think it's up to each of us to acknowledge that for ourselves. The minute I knew I was pregnant, I had a relationship with that person, even if it didn't come to fruition in the same way that I would have liked it to. So I think that's why community is so important. Jews don't live by themselves. We live surrounded by those who can hold us and help us to grieve and help us to celebrate.
One more thing about the laws. Jewish law is telling you about when it's acceptable to do certain things. But where does it say that you should or shouldn't? Because I understand they're saying, if you do it like this, it's okay. If you do it like that, it's okay. Over here, it's not so okay. But who gets to really choose how you would actually do something? Where does the law say? Because that's what it's all about, right? Because really, we don't really care what you think. That's what the law says, right? Like, look at what happened in Texas. They don't really care what you think or how you feel or any of that. This is the law. This is what they said. You cannot, or you can, or you cannot. So where in Jewish law, or is it in Jewish law, that says you must?
Yeah, Texas. My sister lives in Texas. So she's sorry too. She's developing the skill of figuring out who she can talk to. The people who don't think don't care what you think. This is when we bring in American law into Jewish law, and it's hard to not conflate the two, but Jewish law does not say they say you should if there's a life in danger, but it doesn't tell you what danger means. It tells you protect the mother, but not from from what, from how much. So there's no line in that. There's no black and white. And American law likes to make the black and white because we don't have the time to do this for each and every individual.
But what if the mother chose, knowing that she was in danger, and chose to have the child and sacrifice herself for that child? I mean, because mothers would do that.
So yes, there are mothers who would choose to her soon to be born baby's life over her own. That's not in line with Jewish law. But and there's always that but. And that same thing. And no, yeah, but like saving a drowning person is another example of that. Safek sakana. So you can, there's also a line at which you really shouldn't try to save a drowning person. You should throw them something that floats, not a brick. But you do the best you can with what you've got in every situation. Any other questions? No? Siamno? Yeah. Well, I want to say thank you so much, Rabbi Nico, and all of you, Temple Beth Tikvah, for inviting me here and for sharing Shabbat with me and for sharing your lunch with me and for just being open to this conversation. I know that it's not easy, and the fact that there are so many of you here and here, thank you, those of you who've been sitting patiently. I guess if you're, I guess if the screens are off, maybe they fell asleep, but or maybe they're naked. I don't know, but. We don't try to offer all the answers. That's what Joni was saying. Oh, that was from your Chase account. Sorry. Pop up from Chase. Welcome to 2021. Or goodbye 2021, as the case may be. Thank you again. Happy New Year, Shabbat Shalom, and hopefully we'll do this again.
So thank you very much, David. I just want to share something that you made me think about in this context. Is that the first mitzvah that we get in the book of Genesis is pru verbu. It's go forth and multiply. Umiru. And do it fast.
And fill it.
Yeah, melut haaretz. Yeah, and fill the earth. But on the other hand, we say that saving a life is, and it's maybe with the same idea, is saving the entire world. And I was thinking that in the context of thinking ourselves as partners in the creation, for those partners, should be some guarantees for their safety. And I see that in the abortion, maybe in the context of Jewish law, is one of them. It's one of the things that somehow fortifies the idea that we are partners in the creation of the world, and we are subjects in this creation, not only objects. So thank you very much for the wisdom and for the Torah, and thank you for being with us this afternoon.
Thank you.
תודה רבה.
Lisa.